to a concern that the community was having, that people would do their training, get so excited, come to these amazing dinners, get even more excited. We'd see them a couple of times, and then they would say they're not getting the work and start not coming and disappear a little bit. And we really wanted tonight to address why this is, share some tips on how to build your practice, because it's definitely a skill we all don't learn in our professions, and to myth bust a little bit about some of the concerns that a lot of people get all the work, or that everyone has a 100% CP practice. So we're going to learn a little bit about that from the panel, who Daniela are going to introduce in a second.
Yes. So here's our panel. So here we have Jeff Montajong, and Jeff started his own firm about 5 years ago. At the beginning of his practice, he did litigation for about a year and a half. Now he has a settlement practice that includes negotiation, some mediation, out-of-court process, different kinds of out-of-court processes for people, and also helping clients with settlement options who are in a court process, but no litigation. He's been practicing collaborative practice for about 2 years. Just under 2 years. Okay. So next we have Ellen Nightingale. Ellen is a lawyer who started out her practice in Northern Ontario and has worked throughout the GTA. She's practiced for 30 years, including litigation.
36 years.
Sorry. 36 years, and had a full practice including litigation. She's been doing collaborative practice since 2004. Ellen now has a settlement-only practice, and it's 80% collaborative files, and also she does negotiation and working with clients in mediation process. And then on the end, we have John Williamson, who's our financial neutral professional. John started out as a lawyer and practiced law. He's now a financial professional at Fairmore Family Law Financial Solutions, which started in 2012. John has been doing collaborative practice for 4 years, and 80% of his practice is now collaborative. The rest is mostly acting as a neutral financial, jointly retained by parties who are in court. So that's our panel.
Okay, so what tips do you guys all have as a new person starting CP, whether that means you're new to the profession or more just new to CP? What tips do you have for building a practice? Jeff.
So I don't know that there's any real secrets in terms of where your work comes from. I think that's something that everybody does differently. My approach is to focus less on bigger networking events and try and develop more intimate personal relationships with people. But that I sort of consider a pipeline, and if you are bringing in work in any way, whether it's litigation work as a lawyer or therapy clients as a social worker, many of you may have already had some experience with that. What really makes a difference is how you approach your initial meetings with clients. For me, that's been as a lawyer, focusing less on the law in those meetings and talking a bit more about process, talking a bit more about sort of the pathway to resolution for people, and making sure they fully understand what your preferred option is, the process that you feel most comfortable in, the process that you think can generate the best value. And that's not always going to be a collaborative process. For me, it usually is. And I think it helps to really be very genuine in those initial interactions. So when you're meeting people, and I'm really speaking to lawyers here, and that's what I can speak to. As lawyers, I think we tend to be very rote and sometimes rigid in how we go through those consultations, and often overwhelm clients. It's important to recognize that people come to us in a really difficult time, and the first thing I try and do in that consultation is to offer them some amount of stability, at least in that meeting, that we're going to talk about maybe formulating a plan to get you to an endpoint where maybe you can have a bit of sanity and a bit of stability. We can't solve all your problems in that meeting, but we can talk about a pathway forward. You talk about little steps, and those sorts of things makes a big difference. In terms of how you market yourself, I do believe that in this day and age, it really makes a difference in having a good website. My firm was lucky enough to win an award for our website, and that really drove some traffic for us and made a big difference. We considered some things like moving our office to an area that had a sort of a population that was a bit more suited to us. So we moved from around the King and Ossington area to St. Lawrence Market. And just for our web traffic purposes, that made a big difference. There's other reasons why that's been good for us, and we really like the new office space, but that really brought an uptick in our work. But overall, I think bringing in work is no different than it is for accountants and real estate agents. It's about personal relationships. And without taking up too much time, I'll sort of give you a small story that I was actually speaking to Eva Sachs about earlier. I had a consult about a year and a half ago now with an individual who was talking about their litigation experience. They were dealing with a child support review issue, fairly simple. And I talked a bit about process. I didn't really talk about how to deal with the legal issues he was dealing with. Talked to him about how to have a conversation with his ex. That was a 1-hour meeting. I didn't expect to see that individual again, but the way I approached that meeting, I guess, had such an impact on that individual that he has become, in a weird way, my best referral source. And to me, that was a really underlying that each of these sort of little meetings can really result in something. We serve each other when we talk about the benefits of collaborative process. We're not just doing it for our own benefit and landing a client. We're doing it for the benefit of the lawyer on the other side, or the family professional, or the financial as well. And I think that really makes a difference.
Thank you. To look at me, you might not suspect that a short 10 years ago I was new, not only at this work for the most part, but also in this community, because when I came back from Sault Ste. Marie, I arrived as a completely new face, middle-aged, but new face. And so what I did is a number of things. I joined a chapter called BNI, Business Networking International, and I went religiously every Wednesday for lunch with a group of people who did everything except what I do. So I sat in the family law lawyer chair, and there was a real estate agent and a mortgage broker and a chiropractor and you name it. And I still get referrals, although I've not been a member of that chapter, of which I eventually became president, and about maybe 6 or 7 years left, from people who sat with me around the room, guests that they brought, and it forced me to get up every week and do a 60-second infomercial about what I do best and why you would want to refer your friends and clients and customers and family to me. Who do you know that needs whatever it is? So I would strongly recommend that you get out there, you find a BNI chapter somewhere near you, or if it's not, get in the car and go early in the morning on the other side of the city, because it paid off for me in spades. Like Jeff, I developed what I think is a stellar website. At least people tell me that they like it and that it sounds like me. It's all in the first person. It has been tweaked several times, but it is very much who I am and the way I approach people, and how important it is for me to make them feel their very best. So if you don't have a good website, I encourage you to get on that. I'm happy to share my design firm with you. Anybody else whose website that you like, perhaps even Jeff would share his. I joined the board of CPT very soon after I arrived, partly because I'm a little bit of a social butterfly. I'm all over the room, and so with the help of somebody who has now retired, but most people know Sharon Cohen, she introduced me to everybody, and everybody became my friend right away. So somebody said, join the board. We have turnover, there's a place, please come on. What did I know about the collaborative community? Very little. But I did a 6-year stint on the board, and I am now for the first time not on the board and almost missing it. People know who you are. You stand up at the front of the room. Even if you're not sitting on the board yet, let people know you would like to sit on the board, because the vacancies come up and they turn over. Let people on the board know you'd like to join a committee. Maybe it's the CPT committee, maybe it's the OCLF committee. Get out there, get involved. When I was starting, shadowing was not something that people were doing, but it happens more and more now. So whether you're a lawyer and you're starting, or you're a family professional or financial, please ask somebody if you can tag along at the beginning of the file, all through the meetings, offer to take notes. I'm happy to take people with me, articling students or newly trained. And a lot of people are doing it. So I encourage you to do that, because the more time you spend in the meetings, the more credible you're going to be to people who are thinking, oh, who else can I work with? Well, boy, she sure did terrific progress notes. She really must have understood what people were saying. She got right to the heart of it. Initial consult tips, I know that Jeff touched on that, and I make it my business when people come to talk to me that I lean in. I want to be this person's new best friend, because I need to see them, they need to feel my energy. You have kids? Show me the pictures. Everything gets comfortable after that. Here's the BlackBerry or the tablet. Here's Johnny. Here's Mary. They're lovely. They're all lovely. And if I tell them that they're lovely, it's because they are completely adorable and lovely. You have kids? Well, yes, I do. He's 30 and he's married, and suddenly there's a rapport. I do very little law in my initial consults. It's all about, would you like to be able to sleep at night? Would you like your kids to thank you at the end of this, or even through this process, for the way you handled yourself and what you modeled for them? Oh, by the way, there's a process that does all that. So it feels like, oh my goodness, how did you know what I needed? It's all about feelings and the way people feel. The law is too much. Their heads are someplace else. It's all about, I trust you. Thank you for listening to me. If your client sends you an email that afternoon or the next morning, I was so happy to chat with you. You made me feel so comfortable. I really think that I'm going to be okay. Then you did exactly what you're supposed to do. You may not have a lot of files right now. That's okay. It took me a long time to build a practice. And the fact that I do so much of it now is cumulative. It's taken 10 years of just being your very best. Even in your first file, your second file, if at the end of all of the meetings in a given file, the other spouse would not refer to you, then you weren't at your best. And that came home to me very clearly the first time that happened. I acted for the wife. The husband sent people to me, because he could see that we're really all on the same team. There's no winners, there's no losers, and I care about all of you. And if you show people that, even if you say it, it matters. I care about what happens to your peeps. I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Giving me a microphone is a very dangerous thing. So the most valuable thing I own is probably this Moleskine book, because I've basically spent the last 4 years wandering around talking to people, coming to meetings like this where great collaborative leaders have been talking, and I've been writing lots of notes, and I read them. And it's an amazing thing to go back 2 or 3 years and read some of the great panel discussions we've had in this room and other rooms, and just one-on-one meetings, because Fairmore, our firm, Carrie and I, didn't exist 4 years ago, and so we're kind of a good example of new to the field. But where whatever success we're enjoying is a result because of the generosity of this community. I have never called a person in this room or people who are often in this room and asked for their time to learn from them and ever been refused. And that's an enormous resource. So my first tip is that there is no substitute for getting in front of other members of the community from whom you can learn and asking them about ideas you have. It was a huge advantage for us. Secondly, while people are incredibly generous with their time and their information and sharing, they're very busy. And so we discovered that it's hard to get files from very established people who have very sound, established relationships. So we decided that if we wanted to grow in this space, we would target and search out people who are perhaps newer to the field, who in fact want to develop their practices. So we decided that our growth strategy would be creating our own hub. And our hub was based on the concept of strengthening the advocacy and the effectiveness and the results and experience of family council. That's our shtick. The concept being that we're happy to work under any law firm's brand and bring credit to that brand is our aspiration. Third tip that I thought really resonated for us is in this community, it's extremely useful to give before you get. So I joined the board of the Kawartha Collaborative when it was getting established. I begged to come on board the board of Durham, and some very experienced senior people took mercy on my high-pitched, whiny voice and allowed me to join. I asked a very experienced group if I could join the York board. And I started facilitating study groups at York and Collaborative. And of course, biggest fraud in the world, me facilitating a study group, because in fact, there's enormous tribal knowledge in these organizations. And by facilitating group learning, you are in fact sucking up so much information yourself. And if you can make meaning of it and share it with the larger community, that's a service they value. So getting involved, doing project work, and by being in front of people who are experienced people, illustrating why it might be fun to do a file with you was a very important part of our learning in the early years. If I could share a couple things that I've found, Carrie and I have found practically useful in building a collaborative practice. So for example, comment has been made here about the vital importance of doing great initial consults. And I spent 25 years as a lawyer, so I could go and do an initial consult. I'd turn on the autopilot, the mouth went on full automatic. I'd wake up 40 minutes later, something would have happened. Maybe I had a retainer check. I don't even remember what happened. I don't even remember how I got there. But I could do it in my sleep. And it was hard work to suddenly do a collaborative initial. It's so different. So a tool that I found very helpful, and again, I'm not capable of an original thought. I always find other great thoughts and adopt it, was the client goals and interests questionnaire. I actually, Carrie and I sat down one day and we modified it to be a nice script for an initial consult. It forced us to ask non-legal questions. And we were amazed at the kind of response we were getting from clients who basically did all the talking and thought we were brilliant. So I brought extra copies. I'm going to bring copies of all these documents, 30 copies. I'll put all these documents in the front here, and you're welcome to take copies of anything we bring. But I think if you really want to try something novel, try using a derivation of the client goals and questionnaire as your initial and see what kind of reaction you get. We found it a very interesting reaction. Another tool we really found really helpful in building our collaborative practice, again, larceny being part of my background, Brian Galbraith and the divorce team developed this wonderful thing called basically a a process ladder. And basically what it shows is the different ways people can transit separation and divorce, starting with kitchen table agreements going up to full-blown court of appeal, and it's on a hierarchy of cost and conflict. And I find this a very stimulating visual that clients really adhere to when you're talking about the concept of where collaborative fits in the hierarchy and how it kind of moves. And again, I have copies here which I'll leave at the front for anybody who'd like to get a copy. The other thing that I thought was the great accelerator of our development and marketing was the protocols. And I encourage anybody who's interested in doing a leap forward on collaborative to become experts on the protocols, because it's a great leveler of experience. If you become really good on the protocols, you can actually punch above your weight, often above more experienced people who haven't paid much attention to it. And I think the future somewhere lies in a new version of the collaborative. But again, the Chestnut Hills folks have been so generous in sharing this, using it, allowing other people to use it. I just brought a couple face pages, but I know they, and I believe they would permit me to share with you a soft copy. If anybody wants a soft copy, I'd be glad to connect you with them so that you can ask them for it. It's the rules of practice for collaborative. And so knowing this really gives you an edge up when you're talking to more experienced collaborative practitioners. Doing great initials means you have to have answers to a couple of really tough questions that clients always ask. The kind of question is, when we try to advance collaborative, we found ourselves tongue-tied often. It's harder to sell collaborative than you think. Although being a former litigator, I marvel at the fact people can sell litigation. How the hell do you sell that? I have less trouble selling collaborative, to be honest. But when you have to ask the question of what's distinctively different about collaborative practice from anything else you could experience? Why does collaborative process work better than any other approach that you could take? How does the use of team really benefit you, the client? And is collaborative more expensive because of all these bodies you're throwing at me? Why would I choose collaborative instead of mediation? These are really important questions. And so, as a facilitator for two study groups, again, I stole blatantly. I got action learning exercises going on with these two very, very experienced practice groups. And I wrote down what they said to every one of these questions. And so there's probably about 100 different responses to all these questions that are the product of smarter, better experienced people than me. But I have copies of all this, and I keep all this stuff under my blotter, and it really comes in useful in building your collaborative practice because it gives you such confidence and assurance of these tried and tested methods of selling collaborative. So there's copies of this up here as well. The other resource that I really found helpful is the book that our own beloved Victoria Smith and Richard Shields and Judith Ryan wrote, and the chapter that deals with initial consults. And it really shows in chapter and verse what's so different about an initial collaborative consultation than a traditional one. And I commend it to you. I think I didn't have copies of it here today, but I have copies of all the other documents. And finally, and I'll shut up, Carrie and I sat down and we thought, what were the things that we've tried that we thought were practically useful? And we came up with 27 things we did that we found practically useful in marketing collaborative. So they're on a sheet, and there's copies up here, and you're welcome to have a look.
If I can just add to John made a comment about working with more experienced teams, and I think there's some truth to the fact that there are very experienced teams that are difficult to crack into, but I also think it's naive to expect that that's where your work will come from, that you can come to these meetings and people in this room will be your sole source of work. You need to be converting possible clients to collaborative clients if you want to do collaborative work. And if you really want to learn from an experienced team in terms of being a part of that team, I think it's important to be offering those clients to some of those lawyers as well. I'm speaking about lawyers, but I think this applies to anybody. I think there's certainly some value in sort of sharing the work and whatnot, but it's likely a bit naive to think that you can only get work from the people that are practicing in collaborative law. You've got to go to other professionals. You've got to go to whoever would send you, if you're a lawyer, your litigation work, your accountants, your real estate agents, etc.
You guys do 100% collaborative work, right? So none of you have full collaborative practices. So what would you say is the biggest challenge in bringing work to you? I don't think that's on.
Is this on?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, the biggest challenge in bringing in collaborative work, I think, is having to have the confidence that they may walk out the door if you're not offering what they want. For me, but I think committing to a process is important because it helps potential clients see that you really see the value in that. And I don't tell clients that I would only work with you if you're in a collaborative process, but what I do tell them is I won't work with you if your choice is litigation. And these are the reasons why I think a particular process might be best suited for you. But that is a real challenge because a lot of people really aren't all that educated on what's available to them, and what they see on TV and what they hear from friends and family is that you go to court to resolve a dispute instead of thinking you go to court when you can't resolve a dispute.
I don't consider the fact that 20 or 25% of my practice is not collaborative being a problem, because it may well be that the client, after the initial consultation, is on board with collab, and I've provided a number of names for the spouse, and as may well be, the person is entitled to choose who they want and chooses somebody who is not collaboratively trained. That provides me an opportunity to bring my collaborative spirit, my tools and skills into the file, and coach somebody who's not collaboratively trained into making better decisions in the way they approach the file, the issues, stop speaking on behalf of your client. And I encourage the meetings, notwithstanding the fact that the other person is not collaborative. So much of my work, even if we're not signing a participation agreement, is in the spirit of taking care of people as opposed to the strict protocols. It may also be that someone comes in to speak to me and while loves the idea of the process and thinks that the spouse may as well, they can't afford to have two lawyers from the get-go. And so we'll talk about the benefits of mediation and how to choose a good mediator. Maybe it's 393. Maybe the modest incomes require the sliding scale, but I'm available, as will another collaboratively trained lawyer or someone like that, for ILA, and we will coach you through it, even though it's not a collab file. So I have a lot of files where people are sort of coming and going to me while they're working with a mediator. Collaborative meetings are time consuming, and I think if 100% of what I did was collaborative meetings, I'd probably never be at my desk. I'd either be in somebody else's boardroom or hosting them in my own. So I like the smattering of other faces and other lawyers and other styles. And some of the people I've worked with who weren't collaboratively trained became collaboratively trained after I told them how fabulous they were at the kind of work that they do, and good on you.
The toughest part about building collaborative practice for me was to stop talking and have the client talk more.
No.
I speak the truth. That's a real challenge because, again, full autopilot. That said, the real opportunity is if you hear the client's narrative, there's a fantastic opportunity to show them how everything they have as a goal, an interest, or an anxiety can be addressed much better by collaborative than any other option they can touch. It's actually pretty devastating, and it's basic sales technique, showing how in fact what you have to offer meets every single one of their needs. Collaborative is the only process that gives the client exactly what they need in exactly the right sequence, in exactly the right recurrence, in exactly the right measure, at exactly the right cost. There's no process that does that. The second challenge in building collaborative practice is, and it continues to be, encouraging other collaborative professionals to use the collaborative neutrals to do early process consultations, to help shape the thinking of the reluctant spouse, to help shape the thinking of the reluctant lawyer, to sit in on some of their early some of their early initial consultations as a partner. One of the things I so admired, Judith, for example, just built that process into her intake process. It's amazing to really watch from a distance. But there are very experienced family and financial professionals in the group who would be happy to assist and be part of, at no cost, to help people who are building their collaborative practice, help in terms of capturing that kind of stuff. And because it's very much in our interest to make you a success. And that's also the nature of our kind of community. But we continue to promote it, and it's hard. We don't get many acceptances.
You work with a lot of newer people on files and have experience with that. So could you sort of speak to what that's like and why you think it's important that there be sort of mixed teams in terms of level of experience? Tell us your thoughts.
Well, the first and most obvious answer is that the ones who've been doing it for a while and who are doing a lot of it are not always going to be doing it. And so if we're not grooming other people to do the best work possible and the best professional, whoever you are, lawyer, mental, or financial, then the families of Ontario are not going to have the opportunity to separate without bleeding. If I'm not helping younger people get better, then I'm going to be dancing with the same partners all the time, and nobody's going to have anything to do, and they'll stop doing it. The young people that I have, or new young people that I've had the opportunity to have files with have, for the most part, really amazed and delighted me. And I can see why they chose this kind of work, because not every family law lawyer has the stomach to care about what other people feel and get their hands dirty. And the ones who don't come to this would just as soon stand up and talk to the judge as to talk to their own client and really care that every word you say resonates 10,000 times fold in their ears after they hear it. And you better be very careful about what you say. I did have a situation within the last year where I had a file with a newly trained, always litigated, but had just done the CP training, because she and I actually had a file, 2 files together previously that went so well that she got trained. The clients were very difficult together, and particularly her client, the wife, was very difficult. And we had full team, and the neutrals were very experienced. So only wife's lawyer was new at it, and it might have been her first. And in the 3rd meeting, after all of the information had been exchanged and we knew where their heads were and what she was angry about all the time, and she was difficult to please. She was quite difficult. We were struggling, and we were caucusing, and she was banging her fists on the table with her lawyer in the lawyer's office, and we could hear it. And I thought, holy smokes, this lawyer is just gonna run from the building. She doesn't know what to do. She is frightened beyond words. So I grabbed the neutrals and we went into somebody else's vacant office, and I said, look, we gotta dig her out and we have to show her what to do. What would so-and-so do if she were the lawyer, or so-and-so? What would she or he be doing right now? We made a list of all the things that this lawyer needed to say, and in the order in which she needed to say it. And we called her in and we walked her through it, and she was like visibly relieved. Thank you, I need help. I'm gonna lose this, I'm gonna mess up. She went back in and she did it, and a few minutes later they came out and they made a deal. So I keep, for those of you who've been in my office, in the lovely annex in a big old house, I have a Chinese screen just on the side of my desk, which hides a multitude of sins on the wall behind the screen, including all my most favorite expressions. Dig the team out. It's not scratched on the wall, it's not my building, but it's all sort of taped up, and there must be like 50 of them everywhere. When I feel something, when I see something, when I, like you, steal something, I'll go and look, and suddenly I know just what to say in an email. I know what to say on the telephone. I look behind and I'm in a better place speaking to somebody in front of me. So everybody has a system, and develop yours to be genuine. But as far as legacy, I hope I didn't get this question only because I'm the oldest senior person at the table.
You're the best at reaching out to new members, and you really care. That's why.
I do care, Charlie. I care because I think everybody is amazing, and if you've signed up to do this work, and it's not easy, but it's so rewarding, that you must have a bigger heart than everybody else. And I want to make sure that people like me coach, nurture, and bring out the very best in each and every one of you.
I want to open this up if there's any discussion or any questions, comments, challenges you would like to share or brainstorm with the group.
When I started this work, I was very intimidated by the clique or the clan or the people that did all the work, and I didn't know how to get into the circle. And I think what was mentioned tonight is you have to convert your own clients, and I didn't get referrals at first because no one knew me. And they didn't know if they referred a client to me if I was going to be compatible with them in the team, and then it would fail. So getting to know people in the community is really important, but also converting your own clients to the process is how I started my collaborative practice. So thank you for bringing that up.
I just wanted to make a couple of points. We're just triggered by what the panel said. And one thing, if you have a secretary or an assistant, make sure they understand what you're doing, because often they're the first line that clients meet. And my assistant is great at talking about when the client calls, they will often raise, have you heard about collaborative? That's something that, Judith does a lot of, and it's it might be very supporting for you. So I think it's good to do that. Or what I often do is I say to my assistant, if you're not sure or they're not sure, I'll talk to them. So, don't be afraid to spend a few minutes with the clients talking a little bit, because they often want to hear who you are. So I think that's probably true in getting any client, but I think it's particularly true for collaborative files. And I guess, what was my other point? Oh, I know. When you're talking to clients at that initial meeting, often, as you're saying, don't do a speech, but often ask them the question, how many people are going to say no to, would it be helpful to you to have somebody, who could help you get through the parenting piece? Or would it be helpful to you to get some, sort of help putting your financial stuff together? So when you're looking at an interdisciplinary team, oftentimes, who's going to say, no, I don't want any help or whatever? And then you can introduce the financial person or the family person, because, I think rather than speaking to them and telling them they need them, it's much better if you ask them and let them tell you you need them. So those are my points.
No, that's okay. I just have a sort of a practical question. For those of us who are newer to the practice, but also at a lower rate than many of the people in the room, there does, you anticipate that the issue of if I can convince a client that collaborative's the way to go, it would be helpful for me, and I know a handful of people who are sort of at similar rate than I am, but it would also be helpful maybe as a group if we can sort of work together to sort of figure that out too, because it would be, I think, me saying my rate is this, and I'm going to refer you to 5 people whose rates are $300 more than mine or $200 more than mine, is going to be discouraging, right, to the other party. Whereas if I can refer to 5 or 6 people that I feel comfortable referring to that have rates within a similar range, does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, that you raise a very good point, and thank you. You might find that having not done a lot of the work yet, that you might want to consider suggesting someone more seasoned and more experienced on the other side, and then having the spouses share costs together, because it may be that if you work with somebody with a little more experience based on perhaps your own assessment of the complexity of the issues and the nature of the communication and the amount or lack thereof of residual affection, it may be that not going to someone exactly at the same place as you are, but stepping up a little bit at a different hourly rate, and then suggesting that there be parity at the end and the cost be shared, might be of benefit to the file and to the family and to your own learning at the end of the day. And I'd be delighted to work and share that way with newly trained people. Absolutely, I think it's a benefit to both. Fresh ideas, seasoned ideas, they're all good ideas.
Is there, I think maybe part of what your question was too is, sorry, Darlene, is do we have anything in CPT where we actually can find it? Because sometimes I know that there's financial constraints where they actually can't afford to have, they need 2 people that are pretty inexpensive. Is there any way do we have a system, I think it may be the question, about figuring out what people's hourly rates kind of are?
The other question I'm always curious about is, are 4 retainers going to really kill this before it really starts? I mean, aside from the hourly, are 4 retainers going to kill this? So is there some way we as a group can collaborate to sort of say, look, let's make sure everybody gets paid here so that the pressure on retainer up front doesn't destroy our ability to do great work together, to learn and work together?
How would you suggest?
Well, for example, I mean, if a team got to actually put their heads together and said, look, instead of, I don't know how many thousands of dollars a retainer, a smaller retainer, but here's the thing. The final product is not going to go out until, in fact, we have a satisfactory system to ensure the team is properly remunerated. So lawyers always have that anchor or a large retainer. Neutrals have to take a bit more of a risk, I find, at times, but our rates are lower. But you add $3,000 to $5,000 retainers up front, and I think that's a wall. I'd love to be creative with collaborative teams to talk about, because all we're worried about is getting paid. And there are other ways of doing that.
I would, just to follow up on that, I think it's important to make sure you understand approximately what other people are charging. But sorry. At the same time, I do tend to give, if I have a client who's looking for somebody around a certain amount, I will tend to give a name that isn't in that range. Because sometimes people just, they make a connection and they want to work with who they want to work with. And there are certainly people that are of a much lower income level where that's just not realistic, and you have to be sensible about that. But sometimes people will see value in that initial connection. So just be careful not to close that door.
I want to leap in here because I was triggered by your comments, and there are a couple of things I want to say. First of all, I've always suggested to a client when I persuade them of the collaborative process that here's the website, here's the brochure. I encourage your husband or the other spouse to visit the brochure. I don't give a list of names because I have never found when I give a list of names that the other spouse will go with the group suggestion. But I always suggest that I will adjust my hourly rate. If it turns out that your spouse chooses a lawyer at whatever rate, I will adjust mine because it's a foregone conclusion. They will compare notes. They know my rate. They know their lawyer's rate. So let's get real. They're not going to want that huge disparity. Now, I always protect myself by saying, obviously, if the lawyer on the other side is charging $250 an hour and she's just out of the gate, you're not going to get my 31 years of experience and how many, 20 years, 15 years, however long, I can't recall, in collaborative, you're not going to get it for $250, but I will adjust to make this doable. And we will be perfectly open and candid about that at the beginning of the process. And as for the neutrals that I will pull in, they're on an as-needed basis. And we don't have to have everyone at every meeting. So I do have a panoply of neutrals, whether they're parenting coordinators or family professionals who will help in the parenting, who will give a free consultation on a unfortunately litigation matter. Yesterday I pulled in a family professional who is collaboratively trained to meet with my client to deal with the difficult issue of making a parenting proposal. I hived her off. I said, she gives an hour free consultation. She's going to do this work for you, and it's going to come out of my retainer. She will bill me. You're going to have this service. I couldn't deal with it. I was dealing with the client on a hand-holding basis, way too much. My hourly rate was way too high. So I packed, this was actually a collaborative, part of the collaborative toolkit, but I used it in a litigation context. So you get to learn people who will do this. And the client thought it was just brilliant that because I wasn't able to work with her on that piece, but it's parsing the work out. And they buy into it, the value of it. And so I don't worry so much about hitting them with a $6,000 front-end load for the whole team. We bring this in on an as-needed basis, and I'm not having trouble with that. And I would come back to your comments, Jeff. I have every single collaborative file I have had in my practice, I persuaded the client to collaborative. And yes, I've fed other lawyers in collaborative work. I have never gotten a file back. I don't understand why that should be. I'm pretty generous with the inter-referrals, but I find that there's a concern because people are still partisan in their thinking. They're still us and them. And very, very nervous if their spouse is going to use like the spouse won't use a referral that I'm going to give. So, and I think that's where the difficulty is coming from and breaking into these teams, because even if a collaborative lawyer wants to refer a case to me, I don't think they'll be able to sell their client on using someone that they've handpicked. I don't know. I'd be very interested in, I know there are very well-established teams in Toronto, but I would be very interested on how those teams make it work again and again and again and again, where not only do they have to sell their own client to the collaborative process, but now they've got to get the other spouse to buy into their particular team that has worked together over and over and over again. I'd really like to hear from some people on that one.
I was just going to say, to that point, Darlene, the creation of the team or the collab file doesn't always initiate with the lawyers. I have received referrals on many occasions from the family professional who is the point person, or the financial professional who is the point person, who gave maybe only 2 names, and you pick which one of those you're going to have, and the other spouse will have the other, or give 4 names, and you get to pick 2. But relationships with neutrals create referrals also, not just between the lawyers.
So I think we're gonna wrap up for tonight.
Yeah, I think we're out of time.
Because we're out of time. But really good discussion, and hoping that you guys continue the discussion. And there's lots to talk about here, lots of interesting ideas that probably could be explored in a lot more detail. So thank you, everyone, for your time, and thank you to the panel.